I asked 6,000 members of my online art community what was the best art tip they learned in the last few years that really helped them improve their watercolors. And I got such great responses. I wanted to build on a couple weeks ago. I had a really successful video, and I was trying to think what the viewers specifically of that video would enjoy in today's video. So this video is going to be chock full of several tips. And they're going to be direct from people who are in your shoes, in the trenches of learning watercolor, dealing with the frustrations, and gleaning the knowledge they need to make their watercolors better. So that's really going to help you because it will be coming from people in your exact same shoes. And I got so many good responses I can't wait to share with you. But first of all, my name, for those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. I'm Rachel Parker Varner, and I like to teach not just the how, but the why of watercolor so you can take that information and do what you want. So it moves your art journey forward a lot faster. And so in today's video, we're going to look at all these tips. I would love to invite you to my Facebook group where I got these tips, by the way. It's free. You can join. You can upload your photos and share them with my members. And often, if you ask for advice, we will give it to you. And I get the best advice from my watercolor members. I have a couple artists too that are really amazing watercolor artists. There are so many amazing watercolor artists on my group, and they're so helpful and generous with sharing their knowledge. And it's a great place to interact and grow together. And so I hope you join me there for free. Also, be sure to watch the end because at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about a special deal that I'm offering for a limited time that will never be available on my Patreon again. It's a really low price, good deal to get in on my Patreon at the lowest you'll ever be able to. So be sure to check that out at the end of this video. But for now, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm here at my computer and we're going to look at my Facebook group. So here we are on my Facebook group. Okay, so here's my question that I posed to everyone on my group. What was the number one tip that you learned in the last few years that helped you as a watercolor beginner? I'd love to hear from everyone. So let's see what people said. Use the best quality supplies I could afford, starting with paper being number one. Okay, someone asked me to make a whole video about paper, and maybe I'll do that. So do leave me feedback seriously in the comments what you're most interested in hearing about. What gap is there on YouTube that people need to be talking about more? Is it paper? But briefly, I will talk about my favorite papers and what I would suggest to you if you're trying to build up your supply. About 3 weeks ago, I did a video for Temu. It was paid by Temu, but I honestly will say this is not paid for by Temu. The paper I got on Temu was really good. And you get this whole roll. In fact, let me show you. See this? You get this whole roll. And it's like 4,000 square inches for 4,000 square inches. It was really affordable. And go watch that video so you can see how they did. I was really surprised by how nicely they took scrubbing. It's called bow hung paper and it comes in rough or cold or hot. Cold pressed is the easiest for beginners to paint on. Now, what paper do I personally use? I use Arches cold press 140 pound when I'm doing tutorials for beginners because it's easiest for beginners. It almost blends everything for you. And then when I'm painting professionally for like a national or international show, I will paint on hot press because it shows my brush work the best. And it lifts really like a dream. Not all hot press does, but this hot press lifts like a dream. Stonehenge Hot Press. Bev Joswiak told me about it. So that's my favorite paper. But if you're a beginner and you don't want to spend too much money, but you really should paint on better paper. Why paint on better paper? The colors will be more saturated. They'll pop more. You'll get more of a range from light all the way up the spectrum to dark in your paint. Sometimes on cheap paper, you can't get super darks, and you need super darks to make your painting look good. Another thing is cheap paper, often it's made out of cellulose. It will break down when you do more than one layer, or you can't paint on it really wet And for some techniques, you just really need to paint on wet paper. And cheaper papers break apart. They don't have good sizing. They're not made from 100% cotton. So that is the downside to painting on student grade. Now, if you still want to buy student grade watercolor paper, at least make sure you paint on watercolor paper. Hippie Crafter is one I really like. Their link is in the description below. And by the way, all my favorite supplies are linked in the description below. A lot of them are affiliate links, but it does not increase your price. And all my favorite art supplies are there. I have an even more extensive supply list, which is free at rachelstudio.com/supply list. Those are affiliate links to Dick Blick. I do recommend you shop around. But anyway, you will find links to all my favorite art supplies, including paper. All right, let's not spend all our time on paper. I could make a whole video, see? I could just talk about that forever. Next, Janine Covert says, have reasonable expectations for your progress. Watercolor is difficult and it takes a lot of time and practice to develop your skills. Don't quit at the ugly stage. Don't make everything so precious. Be comfortable with the idea that your project is a learning experience. Allow yourself the freedom to experiment and learn without worrying so much about the outcome. Okay, yes, this is so true. And in fact, I have a perfect tutorial for you. I will link it up here, or is it going to be up here? It'll be up here. And I'll also put it in the comments and or the description. If you guys remind me, I'll try not to forget. It's a free tutorial on my YouTube channel. And on that tutorial, my point of the tutorial was just experiment, just try different things. And so I took a red glittery Christmas ornament. I can't say ball with a straight face, so I'm going to call it an ornament. And so I painted the same ornament 3 different ways. So I was experimenting, I was playing what would look good, what would not look as good, what techniques was I most comfortable with. So I did the Christmas ornament in 3 different ways. So that showed you 1, I was experimenting. I wasn't trying to be precious. And 3, I was also demonstrating how you can paint watercolor in so many different ways. So one way you could paint a glittery Christmas ornament is you could start on dry paper and you could paint wet on dry. And then you can use optical mixing by painting in layers. So you let that layer dry, you paint your yellows first, let it dry. Paint your next color, red, I think it was. It's been a while since I did it. Let it dry. This is optical mixing. You'll learn all about it in that tutorial. I'm pretty sure I talked about it. And then the last layer is a little bit of cools, a little bit of blues or purples for just the shadow area. So that was one way I painted one Christmas ornament. Another way that I painted was to use masking and then get the whole ornament wet and then drop in all the different colors where I wanted them. I love to paint that way. And then the third way I painted, it might have been on a different paper. How did I do that one? There's optical mixing, wet and wet. But that's a great tutorial to show you, 1, all the different ways you can paint. You can approach watercolor painting. There's no one right way. Also experiment. So yes, Janine, thank you so much for that great tip. Okay, Judy Breedlove. Thank you, Judy Breedlove. I love this one. I can't wait to tell you about this more. I talked about it in the video 2 weeks ago about Stop, Don't Abandon Watercolor. That one. It's full of so many good tips. If you guys like this video, you're going to love that one. It was really popular. So go check that one out. I'll link it here or at least in the comments and description. Layering for values was the most important for me and pushing the ugly stage through the ugly stage to the end. I used to give up and put the painting aside. This painting of the horse I'm so awkward. So I hope that doesn't bother anybody. Anyway, so that painting, there's so much to that painting. There's a story behind it. That horse was headed to the glue factory, and then the people that own the farm where is safely now started a GoFundMe, and we raised some money and we saved her, and I had to do a painting, and it's a whole thing. There's a whole story behind that painting. I used layering and glazes to pull that painting together because I was painting and painting and painting, and it just wasn't coming together. It just wasn't coming together. In fact, I'm going to show you the footage because it's so cool. Here goes some footage of me adding a really bright orange layer or glaze. We call this a glaze when you're painting is dry, you painted a bunch of layers, and you paint a somewhat watery mix of a color over a large area to pull that whole area together, or to attach the animal into the painting or whatever it is you're painting, or to add depth and dimension, or to add texture. I have a whole video about the power of glazes. In fact, I will link that here. When you click on these links to watch other videos, it won't take you out of the video. It will just queue it up for you to watch later. So be sure to click on this link to my video about glazes. That was a popular video, so I think you'll enjoy it. But let's watch me put a final glaze on Sassy. Here we go.
All right, so Sassy's face has a lot of colors in it, and it lacks depth. So what I'm doing here is mixing my new favorite mix. I made a whole video about this transparent pyrrole orange mixed with ultramarine blue, but here I mixed it with red and a little bit of blue, and I'm covering a large area of her face with my size 8 round silver black velvet to pull it all together and to add some depth and richness to her face. Now remember, darks come forward. So when I add this glaze to most of her face, it makes it come forward even more, which helps since she's in front of that very bright red background. Red normally comes forward. So these darks really need to be nice, rich darks to make her face come forward in the painting. And so I'm covering most of her face with this glaze. It's about milk consistency. And remember, my painting is completely dry when I start this glaze. And then just to pull everything together, make everything look balanced and cohesive, I also put this glaze over a lot of her neck area. And as I did this, I could see the painting come alive. Usually it's when I put the details in the eyes that my paintings come alive, but for whatever reason, this is really what this painting needed, this glaze of milk consistency, transparent pyrrole orange, which by the way is made by Daniel Smith. It's a gorgeous color, and this is what really made my painting look finished. And by the way, it is this kind of voiceover that you get in all my Patreon tutorials, except they will be in real time with even more in-depth explanation given. So this is also a good sample of how I do my Patreon tutorials. I let you watch the painting unfold in real time and then do voiceover. And here, look what I did. I lifted out, I scrubbed out part of her eye. I pulled it out, and then I pushed this paint back into the eye to add depth and dimension to her eye. We'll talk more about scrubbing later.
I'm skipping down a little bit to Brenda. And she says, I can scrub as long as I use good paper. For this painting here of Sassy, I painted that on Arches cold press paper. And so I wanted to make a point to share this footage with you because it's so dramatic of the huge change I made on this painting. It's crazy. This is going to blow your mind if you think that you can't fix watercolor. Okay, you can fix watercolor. I should do a whole video on fixing watercolor. I've done one before, but it's been a while. I'll link it here if I can find it. But if you use good paper that will take scrubbing, you can get what are called stiff scrubbers, or you can use old stiff oil painting brushes, whatever you want, and you can scrub and erase things. So her halter was orange. And one of the new things that I'm learning that I've been talking a lot in my latest tutorials is that when you put cools and warms in a painting, they vibrate together. They really dance. It enlivens the color in your painting. So I use that knowledge to make sure that I did that in this painting, like in her forelock, especially the hairs that fall over her forehead. That's called a forelock. And I put purples and oranges in her forelock. And I put purples in the background and blues. But her halter was kind of a hot pink orange color, which is a warm color. Warm is like the sun. It's yellows and reds. So think fire, think sun, warm colors. Cool colors are like blues and greens. Anything with blue in it is cooler. And it just depends you can have a cool blue and you can have a warm blue. Warm blue is starting to turn green because it has more yellow added to it. So it's all relative to each other. No one color is a warm or a cool. It is warm compared to another color you compare it to, or it is a cool compared to another color you compare it to. If it's cool, it's bluer than the other color that is next to it. So Sassy's halter was like an orange hot pink. It was very warm, but her coat is a brown orange, which is also very warm, cooler than the halter. And I realized I need to make this halter cool to dance with the warms in her coat. And so I erased the Holbein Opera and the M. Grand Naphthol Red and the Daniel Smith transparent pyrrole orange I painted it with. Beautiful colors, but they weren't dancing with the colors in her fur. So I erased it and I used a scrubber. Let me show you. I'm talking too much. Here we go. I'm going to roll the footage. Here we go. Sorry. Okay, but one thing I do need to explain, if you decide to use scrubbers, you let your paint completely dry. You make sure you use non-staining paints, which if you use my palette, you will have non-staining paints. I have a whole video about my 10 favorite paint colors. A few have changed, but they're pretty much the same, other than I've added transparent pyrrole orange and opera. But I'll link to my 10 favorite paint colors. You can queue it up to watch later. And most paint colors are non-staining. Just a few that aren't are like the phthalates and sap greens and some of the reds. So most colors are non-staining, and you can test your colors to see if they're staining or not by painting them, letting them dry, and then try to scrub them up and see how much they scrub up. If they don't scrub up, they're staining. So that's a very easy way to find out if the colors that you already work with, that you don't have to go buy extra colors. You can just use whatever you have. So that's a trick to scrubbing, is to use non-staining paint, use good paper, let your paint dry. The thicker the paint that was applied, like cream consistency, will scrub up better than paint that was applied as tea consistency. Like tea consistency paint kind of stains into the paper. It makes sense. And the thicker paint sits more on top of the paper, so it's easier to scrub up. That's just what I found. You let your paint completely dry, and then you get your scrubber wet, and then you can scrub. Let me show you. Here we go. Gosh, I talk too much. Here we go.
I'm not crazy about this halter color. I think it needs to be more blue to be vibrating with the oranges. So I'm going to make a pretty drastic change, I think. Hate to do it, but I think I'm going to put more blue leaning color in the halter. Not scrubbing very hard. This is lifting really easy. Almost like that, just like that. Look how much that lifted back. Pretty crazy. You know what? I can push and pull as much as I want. I can put some blue in. I can push the blue in, and then I can pull it back out if I don't like it. So let's try it. I'm going to put some cobalt blue in. So this is my cobalt blue here. And a nice thing about cobalt blue is it'll sit on top of what I've already put. So I'm going to blend it as it comes up through here. Yeah, that's going to vibrate way better with the oranges. I'm going to blend it up here. That looks way better.
What works for one person doesn't work for another. Anne Hightower Patterson. Okay, Anne, listen, you're not a beginner. Anne has her signature status in American Watercolor Society. That's what the AWS at the end of her name is. I'm able to put women in watercolor at the end of my name now. So that's what that means. When you see these watercolor artists put AWS or NWS as National Watercolor Society, NWS, I think NTWS, a National Transparent Watercolor Society. That means that person is a pro, just really good. And Anne lives in my town. She's this amazing artist. She does this beautiful work. But she says use 100% cotton paper always. I would agree with that. Okay, and then Lori likes the water to paint ratio instruction, the milk tea cream. Breathing in grace, that's always good, Jenny. And let's look at a few more of these. Okay, we read that one, embrace the space. I'm not sure what embrace the space means, but there's probably a whole world of knowledge within that. It's just a piece of paper. This is the thing, like Georgia O'Keeffe used to do this. She would get cheap paper and just do study after study after study until she got it what she called just right. So do get cheap paper, like just make sure it's watercolor paper, like Canson probably makes a decent student grade paper. Hippie Crafter, I like to paint on that paper, and I can get my darks really dark and do several layers on that paper, on the Hippie Crafter paper. So do get paper, get a big roll of bow hung off of Temu, and that's perfect paper to practice on. You can really get a lot of good effects on that paper. Practice a lot. Yes. Do exercises, practice, just play. I agree. Don't fuss. I fuss. I'm a fusser. So that works for me. Fussing works for me. Mistakes are beautiful. Slow down and do some planning. Let it dry between layers. That's really important, to let your painting completely dry between layers, and you can tell it's dry when you use the back of your hand and it's no longer cool to the touch when you touch it with the back of your hand. So yes, that's so important. And I showed that in 2 weeks ago, that video that has so many views. Using small pieces of wax, let the layers dry in between. Mixing colors straight on the paper for a bold painterly style. That's a Charles Reed tip. I think that's more of an intermediate thing to learn. But it is a good habit to get into, is mixing your paint on the paper. I'm not very good at that. The windmill principle, I talk about that in almost every video. Furry edges. If you want to learn just a fun video to watch and to see how amazing watercolor is, may I suggest to you my chick tutorial, where I demonstrate how amazing lamp black fuzzes out. I'll link that here. That's just a fun technique, wet and wet. That is not a beginner technique, but it's so cool when you can get it to work. Scrubbing, paint the shading, not the shapes of things you assume you see. Okay, so paint the shading, that's an interesting way to look at it. When you paint the shadows, and a perfect example of that, a curl on a sheep has a round circle roughly in the middle of the curl, and then darker shadows around the clump of curl. And you paint that. You paint the shading, not the shapes of things you assume you see. So that's what that means. So that's a good point, Wanda. And I talk about that, not using that language, but I talk about negative painting and painting around the lights. Paint the shadows and not the actual things that you see. For example, look at this dog. But this is a white dog, and most of the white in watercolor is the white of the paper. So it almost feels like cheating when you paint something like this, because you don't need to paint much. You just paint the shadows. So you would paint the shadows like under the chin. This would be a cool blue color, and I see greens there. You would paint, of course, the darks in the mouth area, but you paint, for example, in the upper lip area where the white furs are hanging down over the tongue. You paint around those. You paint the tongue, and you paint the upside down V's, shapes of shading that make up the upper part of the tongue as it abuts the top of the dog's lip. And those shapes are little upside down V's made by the white furs hanging down over the dark pink tongue. Do you see what I mean? So that's what you paint, the upside down V's, those shadow shapes. You don't paint the white furs hanging down. So that's a big thing to wrap your mind around when you start painting watercolor, is to paint those shapes. instead of the white fur itself. Lost and found edges, that's more of an intermediate level thing to learn, and I'm still learning that too. Charles Reed said to have half lost edges and half found edges. If we look at Sassy, I made a point to make lost and found edges. So let's look and see where I made a lost edge. And for fine art, you want to look for places where the value of one thing matches the value of another thing. And what I am seeing pop out immediately to me is this light area, which is actually a little darker in the reference, but that's okay. You don't have to be a slave to your reference. This is about the same value as this. So I'm going to make a disappearing edge here by scrubbing after everything's completely dry. I'm going to scrub this and make a disappearing edge there. And the viewer's eye is going to make those two parts two different things, but they're not painted that way. Also, we have a disappearing edge here, which is nice. I can even accentuate that a little bit. The more lost edges you have is going to be really dreamy. Let's see if we can kind of figure out a way to do that here. Here is a good light on light area. Now, this could get really blotchy really fast. I'm going to get a clean, clear water brush. I'm going to rub over all of it. Let's see if we can kind of find a place to have a soft disappearing edge with the ear and the background. I'm going to blend this with a bigger brush, going in with my 12 long round to blend it all. So again, why am I able to use this stiff scrubber? Because I've used the right paper with the right paint. And that's, I'm gonna find another disappearing edge here between the halter and the horse. I'm gonna loosen up this hard edge here.
Let me know in the comments if you want me to go more in depth on any of these, and I will. And it's just so fun for me to see you guys get excited about these aha moments. I know I love to share my aha moments. I talked about those in my last, the video that's called Stop, Don't Abandon Watercolor. In that one, I shared 2 aha moments that I've had as an advanced painter that just really rocked my world. So it's just so fun to share that and then get you excited and see everyone move forward in their watercolor journey. I just love what I do. So thank you. So, okay, that's going to have to be it. So if you can afford Patreon at all, at any level, please message me. I have a scholarship fund and I will put your name on my little mailing list. I've got this little mailing list of people who let me know that they can't afford it. And I just don't think you should be iced out of painting watercolor and learning because of money. That's ridiculous. So message me and I'll put you on that list for free. And it's my little way of giving back for everything that you guys give me. And I appreciate it so much. So real quick before I go, though, let me tell you about this deal that I have for my Patreon that is going away in 2025, probably the second week in January. I want to give you guys a full month to take advantage of it. Okay, let me explain how Patreon works is you join at certain tiers. Like if you pay $5 a month, you get access to some of my library. If you join for $9 a month, you get access to even more. If you join at $13, that's my best tier. My best tutorials go in there. And it's because some of my tutorials I put a lot of time into. Like I put a lot of extra explanation and hand holding. So even if you're a beginner, I try to do my voiceovers for those tutorials, those $13 tutorials. I try to keep in mind, I'm speaking to a beginner. They don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So It takes a lot of time, a lot of editing. It'll take a whole week at least to edit one of those tutorials. So it's really a good deal. Even the $13 tier, I promise, you get so much. Like some of these tutorials are level of a course, like most artists would charge hundreds of dollars for all this knowledge. And I only charge $13 a month. It's crazy. But what's even crazier is I do have a $5 tier, but it's going to go away because my library continues to grow and that adds value and I get better and I learn more. So I'm worth more, I think. So my prices go up every year. Like my $8 tier is now $9. But just for those of you who are on my Patreon, just know your price will not go up. It's like when you join at the $8 tier level, you are locked in. Your price will never go up for that tier. If you want to tier up to $13, yes, you have to move up to $13. So someday my $13 tier will be more expensive. And my $8 tier just jumped to $9. And my $5 tier is completely going away because it's just redundant now. So I'm opening the $5 tier up for 500 slots. I have 2,000 free members on my Patreon now. So there's not enough slots for everybody. I don't think that many people are going to want to, but you just never know. So if you want to get in on my Patreon at the $5 level, this will be your very last chance ever to do it. And it's such a good deal. You don't get access to the $13 tiers, but you can taste a few of the tutorials that are in the $3 and the $5 tiers. And just please reach out to me. I do not mind. Message me, tell me what you're interested in learning, and I can suggest tutorials to you. I love doing that. So don't feel like you're bugging me. You're not bugging me. When you join my Patreon, you kind of step up. That's like you stepping up and saying you're worth it. So I appreciate that. So I love to talk to you guys. You are my peeps. You are making all my dreams come true. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask me for suggestions of tutorials that I think might work for you. The other thing I would say is join for a year, because if you join for a year, you lock in those savings and you get 2 months free. So you pay for 10 months, you pay $50, but you get 2 months free. So you pay for 10 months and you get 2 months free. So it's an incredibly good deal to pay for a year, because when you join for a year, you get the added benefit of you can send me your art and I will give you an in-depth critique. Now on my free Facebook group, I do that for everybody. I'll write a couple sentences. But when you are a paid Patreon member and you join for a year, I will give you a more in-depth critique and really scrutinize your painting and really try to give you as many ideas as I can to help improve your painting. And also, of course, tell you what you've done right, because everyone needs encouragement, even me. We all need encouragement, and I love to encourage you. All right. Yes, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm getting hungry. I'm going to go eat. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. And I hope you'll subscribe if you enjoyed this, because I will keep bringing you this content as long as people come to watch. And so leave me a comment, leave me a like. That tells the algorithm that I don't suck. And yes, I still have imposter syndrome. And it's nice to know that I don't suck. So leave me a comment and go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.